Good morning. Thank you for spending your Wednesday with us. So, for those of you who are familiar with MIAC and our programming, know that pre-pandemic, we regularly hosted monthly pottery demonstrations at our Bucksbaum Gallery. And even though we are now open to the public, we are continuing our programming via Zoom until further notice. So stay tuned for details on upcoming pottery demonstrations and other programming by following our Facebook page and reading our monthly newsletter. Today we are joined by Jeff Suina. I'm so excited for his demonstration today. But before we start chatting with him, a few quick things. To begin, I would like to briefly acknowledge the place where this conversation is happening, even though we are not physically at the museum today, in Ogopoge within the Tewa world. As a non-native person living in so-called Santa Fe, I am a guest in the ancestral homelands of the Tewa people. And I wish to acknowledge all of the Indigenous folks, Pueblo, Navajo, Apache, and so many others, past, present, and future, who walk on these lands and steward these places. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Jeff, and then I'll hand it over to him. An artist from Cochiti Pueblo, Jeff Suina works with many different types of digital and traditional media. He weaves traditional Cochiti designs and forms with a flair that is unique to only him. His goal is, quote, to always create beautiful art to make the world a better place. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Lilia, and everyone at the museum. My name is Jeff Suina. So what I did there, I just gave a little greeting, and to everyone, other natives, and those who were able to understand. I gave a little informal greeting. I thanked them for being here, and I told them what my plan was. So my name is Jeff Suina, and I'm here today. I'm happy to be here. The museum has graciously asked me to do a demonstration, so that's what I'm here for today. So what I'm going to do today is that I'm going to create a single piece, and it's going to be a geometric piece, which is not. I do coiling with both water bowls and cornmeal bowls, but over the past year and a half, I've started to delve into more interesting pieces, or more unusual pieces, and those have seemed to garner a lot of attention. And so I decided to show you how to create one of those. And it's a unique process. Some of you who worked with clay before, you might not be surprised how I'm doing it, but it's actually a kind of a mixture of two different workflows that I do. So I'll start by talking a little bit about what kind of clay I'm using. So I was looking at one of the other artists' Zoom demonstrations, and I thought it was pretty insightful about what he talked about what if the components that go into his clay, and he mentioned that he goes into he collects the clay himself, and that's I do that as well. So what I have here is a piece of clay that I've gathered on our reservation. There's some clay beds or clay pits, whatever you want to call them, and it's in a really hard area to to get to. And once you're up there, you have to do your fair amount of digging to get to the pure, to the more pure veins of clay. And then this piece right here is, you could call it volcanic ash. Here we call it ayashan, which is a form of pumice. But I think this is more on the ash, volcanic ash. I know they might technically be the same thing, but the this particular one seems to be a more pure strain. And this one, you also have to do a fair amount of digging um, to get to the more purified forms of it, where there's no mineral, no other minerals or other impurities in there. And and one thing about if you've dug your own clay, once you wet the clay by itself, without any other ingredients in it, the, this particular clay, the Cochiti clay, is very, very elastic, and it almost is like greasy to the touch in a way. And I I failed many times trying to get the right combination. But this kind of clay is very will change its size if you fire it on its own. So that's where this temper comes into play. And this ingredient is just as important as it is. I don't think they can exist without the other. And this white, volcanic ash, so to speak, um, is what binds the clay together. It keeps it from shrinking. Uh, if you, get just the right mix, you can even dry your pieces without having to cover them, or with a plastic bag, or you know, like some other clays, you might have to do that. And so, really, you mix those two together, and you have to crush. You crush the clay and you crush the temper. The temper, since the clay is already fairly pure, um, there's not much need to do to sift out any impurities. But you know, with the um, with the ash, you have to pound it down to a really fine consistency and filter it to almost a powder, almost like a flour, baking flour or powdery type consistency. The finer, the better, because that has a impact on whether or not your slip, your paints stick on um, or adhere to the vessel permanently or not. And these are things that I'm still, these are things that I'm still learning as I'm going as well. I'm a relative newcomer to the scene, and so I have my mentors, and even I'm learning as much as I can from them, and also learning a few new tricks that you can only learn by you know making your pieces. So today I'm going to make a. I don't have a geometric piece with me. I have a couple that I'm planning to unveil for the India market. So anyway, so here we go. So I have a few pieces of Cochiti clay, and so what I'm going to do is, what I like to do is I kind of work the clay for, to get out any air bubbles, or you know, um, distribute the moisture evenly. And so these are sides you guys can see. And one of the things that um, I kind of noticed about when I'm creating a piece, that I generally, especially with the geometric pieces, I don't know how it's going to turn out. And so it kind of almost takes a life of its own. We have one of these rollers, and please don't tell my wife this was one of her folios that she uses to roll out tortillas. But I just um, found it really useful for what I do. So what I do is when I roll out a piece, I kind of flatten it out with this. This is a great tool. See what else do I have in my tool. And so a lot of these tools are, I know a lot of artists like to go with, you know, natural tools to help make their pieces. Um, a lot of these pieces are actually store bought. And so, when it comes to coiling your piece, that's something that you do 99% of what you're rolling out the dough or rolling out the clay and pinching it and so forth. But but these are great aids in helping me cut little pieces out. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just cutting little pieces off, and let's go for maybe a little asymmetrical square here. So you can kind of see that. And so what we have going on here is that, this is sort of the foundation of the piece. I don't have any cookies or, I don't have a wheel or anything like that. Particularly for these shapes. I mean, when I do other stuff, sometimes I use a wheel, not an electric wheel to to have it constantly rotating, but just to kind of shift my perspective on what needs to be touched up, what doesn't need to be touched up. So the second thing I have here is, and a lot of if some of you worked with clay before, we know that when we attach pieces together, you have to, the places where the pottery is going to be joined, you score the areas, where the pieces are going to attach to each other. And that's just what I'm going to do here. This is water, good old tap water, Cochiti water. And you can see that I am just scoring. And, there's several ways to go about this. I used to have this wire brush thingy tool that worked just as well. I've seen my mother use a fork, to score the pieces. So that's kind of what we have here. So we see a little these little train tracks here along the edge, and then what I do is I just dab water on there to make the clay a little bit more elastic there, so that the water will make it more flexible to work with. And so, and then I start building my other pieces, and I go mainly by flow and what punch. So I'll start making this piece right here, and so let's go. I have a little ball of clay here. So okay, so anyway, I'm creating the first wall, I guess, so to speak. And your geometric pieces don't have to be four sides. They can, I like to say that they kind of take a life of its own, And so I'm just working here, molding out a rough piece here. Yeah. It's almost like baking cookies, like a cookie cutter, So I'm just cutting the edges, and I roughly, make the sizes. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to join those two pieces together. And so what I'm going to do here, so the piece that's going to attach to the bottom, I'm going to score the bottom of this first, I'll call it the first wall 1, right? And that's all that I do. I'm just making those nice little indentations into that part of the clay, add some water, and then I just join it together. And at this point, the clay is very soft and very unstable right now. So I'll do my best to show everyone how it looks. And as it hardens, I'll be able to work with it more and get the angles more mathematical, if you want to call it. So now that I have this piece roughly attached, so what I'm going to do now is, so So I have this tool, this wooden tool that I use to coerce the clay into attaching to the other piece. My mother used to use popsicle sticks. This one's a little bit bigger, but I think the same concept applies. And you could use your finger too. So this piece is a little bit smaller, so I'll stick with this guy right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move some of the clay from the top wall down to the base. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that right there. So I use this tool to kind of force this clay on, to attach to the bottom piece. And then, and I just do that, a few times to make sure the pieces bond and the clay compresses together. And then I go on to the other sides to try and do the same thing, as well. Like here, I'll do the same thing. And then on the sides, right here where they join, I'll do that as well. And so that is kind of our first first wall, so to speak. One of the things I do, as an added insurance policy, to keep the clay stable, is I'll use a little bit of my coiling technique. So I'll roll a little piece of clay, like so, and I will score it. Like so. So you can see, it looks like a gummy worm, a Pueblo gummy worm, let's call it. And then I wet it, and then I just attach it here. So this sort of adds a little bit of stability to keep the wall, depending on how wet your clay is, it keeps it from bending down, and being a sad pottery. So what I'll do now is that you can see my little stabilizing piece right there. I'll start bending that piece like that into both sides. So and at this point, I don't know how this is gonna look. It could be one of those pieces where I just make the 4 walls and I start to manipulate the height, or it could, so it's a nice little box, depending on, where the what I'm feeling at the moment, I guess you could say that, or what I'm feeling creatively at the moment. So you kind of have, here's your base here. So that the next side is I'm going to do this wall, and the thing, I try to tell myself, not to create a perfect box. Each piece is different. Each piece has their own spirit. Each piece has their own identity, I think. And I try, other than, with the water bowls, or the water pots, I try to make every piece unique. I try to make every pattern that I paint on there, I try to make it unique as well. I think there's only been a few instances where I've used the same pattern twice on a different bowl. So just little things like that. I try to put my identity in each piece. And they could be what I'm feeling at the time, or they could be based on current events that are happening in the world. Stuff like that. Lilia mentioned that about my goal for pottery being to create something beautiful that could put smiles on people's faces. I think that we're we're such a, duality. There's such a duality to our existence, but I think that, I'm here to create things that people, can enjoy and smile at, and enjoy their day, because there's, we all know what's happening out in the world. So hopefully, work like this can kind of give you a break from all that. So here, so back, that's my social commentary. So back to the piece. So you can see that I kind of have this prototypical wall built out. So what I'm going to do is match the piece here. And I could easily make a straight line like that and make it parallel to this piece. But let's go up. So let's go do that. And then this is a straight line down here, but we're going to cut it down so it almost has like a diamond appearance or like a polygon. Those of you who, I work with 3D modeling a lot, and I think part of my inspiration was that when you're working with 3D models, when you're editing 3D models, you a lot of the time, most of the time, the 3D software that you're working with, it displays your geometry as polygons. And so I think this is sort of, those of you who've done that before, you know what I'm talking about. So that's sort of what this is influenced by. So, and then now that I'm going to attach this piece, I just repeat the process. I start scoring the other part of the foundation. But now at the same time, I score part of wall one, so you can see what's going on here. Someone told me that once told me that the geometric pieces remind me of origami or Chinese restaurant takeout containers, and that was, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So here I'll do the same thing with this wall two, we'll call that, and I will score the pieces here. So for my cats, haven't jumped on the table, so that's a good thing. They like to hang out when I'm doing my pottery for whatever reason, and oftentimes they'll drink water, the clay water. It's kind of a lot of time I've always heard, people from Pueblo people saying that when you drink the water from a clay, natural clay, that the water tastes better or it tastes sweeter for some reason. And it's true. There's just something about that earthy, that earthy element, I guess, from the clay itself that adds that flavor, I guess. So now what I'm going to do now, so I have this piece joined here, and it looks rough, but right now, but I'll eventually smooth those pieces out. I use my little popsicle stick tool here, and I'll just join those pieces there. And the good thing about here, this demonstration here now, is that this clay is actually, at a state, at a point where it's rarely saturated with water, so it's not, or the water is absorbed pretty well, so it's not too wet, which is great, and it's not too dry. If the clay mixture is too wet, you kind of have to let it probably sit there for a few days. Otherwise, you're going to have the pieces drooping all over the place like that, right? And so it's kind of one of those things where you have to have a little bit of patience and that sort of thing. The more you have the clay sitting there, the better it gets. I guess gives it gives the clay more time to bond with the water and with the, with the temper. Um, um, so, so check this out. So we have this piece. And so now we have two walls here. Let's see. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just stabilize this outer piece right here. I don't know if you can see that. So now we have, our nice piece. Sort of, looks a little architectural. Um, Kind of looks like the sand crawler from Star Wars. You Star Wars nerds out there. um, I'm a total Star Wars geek, so science fiction. I'm there. Ask me Star Trek trivia. I can answer any question. So, but please keep your questions to pottery. I'm just kidding. Um, so there we go. And so now what we'll do next is, the clay is actually in a pretty good place. It's not drooping. It's not falling over or anything like that. And so I have it stabilized. I have everything, it's not, everything looks in good order so far. So now we're going to let's do wall 3. Let's go do this piece right here. So today is actually the first day of school for all the kids up at, at the elementary and the middle school today. But because of the pandemic, our governor has the kids living on the reservation are still going to be um, doing online school. So I think they're still asleep. It's like mid morning right now. So this is like their last week of freedom. So I'll let them sleep in this morning. So this piece I will cut here. And as you get more comfortable with, with the clay, you'll just or as you get more comfortable with your abilities, all this becomes second nature. Okay, yeah, let's go do that. So I really, when I mentioned earlier that the pieces I don't know how they're going to turn out. Like right now, I'm deciding. I kind of fit a piece, and right now is when I decide, okay, is the wall going to go high or low? So that's kind of on the fly designing, I guess is what you will call it. So we'll continue. Let's go a little bit lower here. So now we're starting to form a wall here. But see, these two pieces look like they're pretty parallel. So let's make this a really short piece, just for chaos sake. Okay, yeah, that'll work good. And you just repeat the process. It's finding the right size, finding the right piece, and then kind of fitting it in, and then you start to score it again. And I know I scored it, the foundation, right away at the beginning, but as you're working with the clay, it sort of loses its integrity, so you have to keep doing it. Hope you can see that. Oops. So this piece is going to go like that. You put water in here. And then you score this one. I'm making my little diagonal. I'm doing my little diagonal pieces here. So one of the things, I don't know how many people, when I was looking at the pottery demonstrations, a lot of the potters were showing you the process behind putting together a piece. I don't know if anybody has done. I didn't look at all the videos, but I don't know if anyone did a painting demonstration. Um, one of the things that I use, in learning kind of this tradition, the traditional cooking way, I guess, was the clay itself. I gathered the paint itself is also you know gathered as well. Um, the white paint that you use as a slip is a very it's a very rare commodity that I don't think many people have. Um, I acquired mine from, I guess I inherited it from my grandmother, and she just happened to have a jar of it, after she passed, and so I use that as my primary source of white slip. And the thing to note about that slip is that it is so sensitive that when you're painting your piece, once this piece is dry and you start to paint it, you can't even handle the piece at all. You can't touch it at all. So when otherwise, when it fires, your fingerprints will show up on the pottery. Um, so when you're painting, you have to figure out what works best for you on how to paint a piece without touching the pottery. Um, and for a long time, that really messed with my psyche because, you know, I'm used to painting, like having my hand rest on the piece so that I can, keep my arm stable. But now, learning this process, it just makes me more amazed at our grandfathers and grandmothers or our ancestors on how they were able to come up with all these intricate designs back then. Um, Ultimately, I learned a process that was good for myself. That in painting the patterns. So I kind of use my left arm to stabilize my hand, and then I just kind of paint away. Um, and the thing with the beauty about when you gather your own materials is that there's a intricate process you know that goes into preparing all these materials. And so I talked about before I talked about what the right mixture for creating the clay that you work with. For the black paint, I have you use the Rocky Mountain bee plant, Cleome cerulata. I think that's not an Olive Garden menu item. It's just that's its official name. And so what you do with that is that you pick the leaves, usually in the early summer, and then you boil it down to a point, usually overnight, that it reduces down and it reduces down to kind of this syrupy consistency, and it comes out brown, or green, depending on what strain or where you get it at. Um, and then once and then you let it dry, and then once you use it, you just rehydrate it with water. It kind of turns into a vegetable. When it dries, it turns into kind of like this lollipop, the consistency of candy, basically. And then once you re-wet it, you start to paint, and you usually, you paint with it as you normally would, without touching the surface, but you have to put multiple coats on there just to make sure the paint will stick. And so once we have it painted on, um, that's sort of where the chemistry lesson happens. So the slip itself, um, when you fire it, turns that all the the organic paint, it turns it into um, carbon. And so what that slip does, or what that white paint does, is that it stubbornly keeps the carbon attached to the piece, and it permanently keeps it on. I don't know how it does it. I spent a few years looking for a new source of that white paint, because apparently the traditional source of it, no longer exists, or it's no longer accessible. So anyway, if you look here, here's our piece. Here's, and actually you could even turn it sideways. There's been more than one occasion where something started as the base for me, and I looked at it from a different angle. It's like, you know what, that looks even better. So maybe we'll rotate it this way so it has a more diamond-like appearance. So you can see my 3 walls here. And I think maybe I'll stick with it this way. And the cool thing too is, with these pieces, if the clay was a lot more wet, you just turn it on its side and, sort of develop the pieces, so to speak. And as it is, with clay, you just keep working and using your fingers to refine the edges, to make it more of what you think it's going to look like. So yeah, that's actually coming out. So now we're going to close the base. I don't even know what time it is. What time is it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to score these edges here. And it's the same process. I'm scoring the places where scoring the areas where the pieces are going to be joined with each other. So what started out, this was going to be the base, but I think it might look a little bit cooler. I always like to have a little bit of height on the pieces, just for aesthetic purposes. So then I will put water there. Now we have sort of this freestanding sculpture. Going there. So now I'll do we'll close off the gem, so to speak. So here, get the clay to the same consistency. Try to, little remnants that I have laying around, I try to reuse as much as possible. All this stuff, someone once told me that all this stuff is worth its weight in gold, because once you start gathering your own materials, you kind of have a deeper appreciation of what goes into, the effort that goes into gathering all these materials. And then, like little remnants, like I have a little styrofoam plate of all my scraps from another piece. And so, you could easily toss it in the trash can, but all the shavings, all the, the sandings of all my clay, I keep, and then I put it back into my supply, because I climbed too many hills. I have too many scrapes and bruises. It kind of you don't want to do all these things in vain and then just toss the remnants aside. And I remember my father telling me that he used to go with his grandmother to go get clay. I mean, they would walk. I don't know how. If it's where I think is where they went, they would have had to walk quite a few miles and then bring the clay back with no vehicles or anything like that. Again, that's just kind of a testament to the people's resiliency, and how they back then all the pieces that you create the bowls were used as vessels for food. Just makes you appreciate kind of the things that the people that came before you, how they were able to master all this. And there were, they were artists, um, botanists, doctors, all this stuff is from the land. It's from things that, were thousands in the years of refining and, you know, learning, learning new things, and, just as a means of survival. It's just makes you appreciate kind of the, you know, we're here now because of their sacrifices, their ingenuity, their resiliency, and, you know, so, what you're seeing when you see somebody's pottery from Hopi or from Zia or Sandia, from Hamas, wherever it may be, you're seeing, you're seeing kind of a living history. You're seeing that artist, you're seeing their ancestors kind of work through that artist, and it's such a honor to kind of witness those different kinds of techniques. All these methods work. It's just amazing. So now I have the fourth wall, um, you know, relatively in place. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to start to bend all this clay, or coerce the clay to overlap over this. And I think the thing too, I remember when I first started out, I was in such a rush to create the coolest pieces, or you know, to everything was based on having things done now, having things done right away. But you know, with the clay, with the pottery, it's such a marathon. I mean, everything, there's a definite long game here, as far as where you start versus where you end up. I mean, this clay that I have here, I gathered 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. I have, I recently got this, I think earlier this year. Um, I have the Rocky Mountain bee plant growing in my yard, which I try to, resupply every year. I don't do it all the time. Um, I have, let's see, batches of black paint, from the bee plant last year. And so what I'm doing this year is I'm replenishing my supply. So I have a few of those plants growing outside, but I'm going to let them. I'm not going to pick them, and they're producing seed pods right now, and I'm just going to let them replenish itself. So probably next year, next summer, that's when I'll pick them. And so it's definitely a game of patience, allowing the ingredients to evolve on their own, I guess, so to speak. So here I'm just doing some little cuts here. So as you can see, so here's the piece now, and further along I'll continue to refine it. So we kind of have this nice little diamond, polygon here. Um, I should ask my oldest son if this is a right angle, or they were learning geometry, via Zoom last year, so which meant I had to be the teacher as well. So as you can see inside, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to roll out some pieces of clay, and then I'm going to put it on the inside to stabilize the connection there, which is what I did on these other 3 pieces. But now that we're closing it off, it just adds to the overall stability of the piece itself.
Jeff, while you are doing that, we
Yeah.
have a question
Sure.
about if you're going to be at Indian Market. And while you're answering that, can you also talk about some other upcoming events that you have?
Okay, so yes, I will be at Indian Market. I will be at WWA 402. That's the booth number. It is directly east of the porch, which is the original selling area. And so um, it looks like I'm in a decent, pretty visible spot. So yes, I will be there. I will be at the Indian Market this um, next weekend. And right now, I have a few pieces that I have completed and some that I'm still working on. But yes, I will be there. And this is my first time being there. This is only like I think this is my fifth show. I think, like I said, I'm a newbie to this whole industry or to this scene. I did the Bernalillo Indian Arts Festival a couple times. Um, and I would have done it last year, but the pandemic said hold my beer, right? Um, but I'm just happy that you know, people are able to maybe go out and mingle again. Um, I'm vaccinated, so that's a good thing. Um, so one thing speaking about the um, and also yeah, I have another piece. Sorry about that. I was going to go off on another storyline here. Um, Form and concept, I believe that's what it's called. It's an exhibition in space um, that is being organized by another group called We Are the Seeds, and that exhibition is, I think it starts today or it starts this week and it ends in October. And so one of my geometric pieces is here, and that one is actually more of a curvilinear piece. And I posted that one on my Instagram side and on my social media platforms. So you may have seen it before. It's a piece called Flame, and it's a real unique. It actually I based it on an actual, flame of fire. So it being an unusual shape, um, I thought it would be the perfect candidate to display over there. So that one is. Do you know the name of the gallery, Lilia? That it's I forget the name of it.
Yes, it's called Form and Concept. It is in the rail yard. And I'm pretty sure the opening is this Friday night.
Is it this Friday? Okay. Yeah, you were asking me about that, right?
Yeah.
So, if it's this Friday night, then maybe I will go. So here's my piece now. So this is kind of what, it is. I have to see it there. Here it is looking from the top. Here it is looking from the bottom. It's very rough right now, but from this point forward, I'll start to smooth it out. And I start out with my fingers. And one thing you can do also is you can, maybe you can add more pieces to it, right? So this is a nice space. So let's see. Maybe I'll add another polygon to it. So let's give it some height, So, in the beginning, when I was learning my craft, all of my pieces were small. And then once I got more confident, with my craft, the pieces get bigger and bigger, and so hopefully, maybe after Indian Market, I'll start, going colossal with these big pieces. So I'm going to add another polygon here, and I'm going to make it triangular in shape. Let's try that. And I had no preconceived idea. I just thought it would be cool. So it actually is kind of look like Chinese takeout container, but that's all right. So we'll start to close up the end, and I'll make a piece that kind of looks like that. So I'll use my wife's tool. Again, don't tell her. I hope she's not watching this Zoom meeting. And we'll do something like that. How about that? Okay. So, now it's starting to look like a gem.
I did have one question.
Sure.
If you could talk a little bit more about your work with 3D modeling and how that impacts your work. I mean, it's really clear, especially with the addition that you're making right now, how your brain works in this very architectural way. So I think it would be great if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, okay. So, the work is architectural in nature. One of the things too is that I do have my degree in architecture. And so once I got my degree, I saw, of course, me being a sci-fi buff, I saw where the, more and more of, movie effects were being done with computer graphics rather than practical models. And so just as I got my diploma, I saw that in one of the community colleges, they were offering a program in computer animation. And so, the Monday after I graduated from UNM, the next, I was sitting in class again, taking classes in computer animation, and the rest is sort of history. I learned from all of the original 3D animating software programs. There was Lightwave, Alias. I don't know if anyone remember that name, Alias. But these were programs that were used to create effects for, at the time, Jurassic Park. The Star Wars prequels were coming out at the time. I think that's what they used for that. And then it just so happened that a civil engineering firm was looking for someone to actually groom someone to help them with their visualization work. So that's kind of how I got my job with Bohan and Houston. So long story short, I've been with them for 21 years and the creative director, and I'm kind of in charge of creating visualizations and work, using engineering data to create these simulations and visualizations of their designs, civil engineering, spatial data, mapping, structures, construction, all those sorts of different things. And so, the environment that I'm, like you said, you can kind of definitely see the influence of, polygonal based modeling, because that's all that I've actually seen digital modeling, at their very core, they're geometric, they're mathematical in nature. And you can kind of see that plays a part in how I create these pieces here. So to add the rest of the, I just continue what I started with, pinching the pieces together, creating little slabs, and stabilizing where the pieces join. So this one's actually starting to look like a gemstone. I'm also into minerals and gems, and so stuff like jasper and labradorite. The one that the stone that actually looks like it has the northern lights trapped in it. It looks dark, dark gray, but when you look at it at a certain angle, you see blues and you see greens and all these different hues. So I'm into that sort of stuff as well. And once in a while, I'll go into one of those places and kind of get inspired by some of the shapes of the natural formation and stuff like that. And so you can see here that I have a hard angle here. So this is sort of almost becoming the lip of it. So, most likely I'll add another piece right here and then maybe here to continue the shape of a geode. I don't know what you would call it. But, that's sort of the life that this piece has taken. And let's see if I can have this piece ready by any market. I'll have it out and I'll have it, like I said, it'll dry on its own. So
I think we would all love to see that at Indian Market. That would be really special to be able to see it coming to fruition. We only have a few minutes left, but speaking about finishing this particular piece, we have a question from Rob about the other part of your process, about the designs that you paint on your pieces and where you get inspiration from.
I'm very, what's the term? A lot of the times, a lot of the pieces, I see what the pottery will offer me. Like with this piece right here, there's a lot of hard edges. There's a lot of right angles, so it's very likely that these pieces will have different edges to it, like a more aggressive design, I guess you could say. With my water, well, let me grab one for you. I'll give you a sneak peek of what I have here. So this piece right here, this was done with the Cochiti slip. This is a finished piece. Although there are hard edges, this one has more curves to it, and it's sort of influenced by what the shape gave me. So this looks like a little water bowl, but it's probably more like a cornmeal bowl. So that is one of the pieces that I'll have next week, as well as a few others.
Exciting. Thank you for sharing that. I can't wait to see it in person. So we are out of time. Unless there's anything else that you want to wrap up, we can go a few minutes over.
Okay. Yeah. Just wrapping up. I'm just,
okay.
Again, thank you to you and, everyone, at the museum for, giving me this opportunity. I love talking about pottery and I love talking about, the process that goes into it and, sharing what I know so that people understand, what these pieces are about. And a little bit of me as well. A lot of this is me. This is what I was meant to do, And so again, I'm just thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. So I hope this was at least entertaining to everybody, and I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram, so all the information of all my events are on there as well as Jeff Suina Art, and I hope to see you all next weekend and maybe this Friday too with the other exhibition as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Jeff. This was absolutely fabulous, and really just a unique look into your work. And I'm so grateful for you to take the time to chat with all of us. So it's really fabulous. So thank you all for tuning in. And like I think I mentioned earlier, a recording of this will be available on YouTube in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thanks again, Jeff.
All right. Thank you.